Day 9 in the Dr. Martin MacNeill murder trial. The public has been riveted by this case and the testimony. Joining us today, we have Tanya Peters, an attorney and legal analyst. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Hey, so you know this case, it's gained national attention, as you know. Why do you think that is?
I think the reason that people are paying attention to this case is because you had the picture-perfect American family, doctor dad, beauty queen mom, 8 children, and obviously what was going on behind closed doors possibly may not have stacked up as to how appearances were.
Hey, you know, Michelle MacNeill, she was found dead in April of 2007. Here's what I wonder is, why did it take this long to get to this point in terms of a murder trial? You know, what was the criteria that was met to meet the level of murder charges against Dr. Martin MacNeill? What was the evidence in terms of medical evidence? Because we haven't really talked much about that.
We haven't, and what's going to be interesting, and evidence is going to come out that will show that there have been several medical examiner reports, but none of them have ever ruled Michelle MacNeill's death a homicide. Her death was originally determined to be of natural causes and then later amended to be a combination of possible cardiac failure and drug toxicity.
So if that's the case, how do you charge a man with murder then?
Well, that's a great question, and that's what the prosecution's going to have to deal with in terms of overcoming the presumption of innocence and needing to prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
And of course, we've heard a lot of testimony 9 days into the trial now from a number of witnesses, including his 3 daughters, one of which is Alexis Summers, and her testimony was called into question today. So I want to just listen into this real quick.
Speak with your father. Describe what happened there.
Yeah, I went to my father and I said, what happened? Obviously, Mom is over-medicated.
And did he respond?
He said, yeah, and he did respond, yes. He said, yeah, I think I gave her too much medicine. I must have given her too much medicine.
Did you did you follow up and ask about what medicine?
Yeah, I said, what did you give her?
Okay. And do you recall what he said?
He said he gave her Lortab, Valium, Ambien, and then I believe he said that she threw up, and then he gave her some liquid Lortab. I believe he gave her Phenergan and Arnica as well.
Arnica. Do you recall him indicating whether or not he had given her Percocet?
I believe he said he gave her Percocet. I wrote down what he told me he gave her.
So why would she write down what he told her that she gave her mother? I mean, what do you make of her testimony as an attorney? You
know, interestingly enough, I don't find this particularly compelling, this line of testimony, because if you've ever had surgery, you may know that the medications that you take during recovery can be confusing. If you're taking pain medication combined with possibly an anti-nausea medication, you may want to write down what you took so you can remember, so that you don't run the risk of an overdose. But here, if the medications were written down, it would be interesting to see that list and see what she was given.
So her testimony not compelling, but you know, obviously defense attorneys have admitted that Dr. MacNeill has some sort of admitted infidelity existed during the time that he was married to his wife, Michelle. We've heard from Gypsy Willis, you know, Dr. MacNeill's mistress. How damning do you think her testimony has been? And then to also find out there's a second alleged mistress that steps forward and takes the stand as well.
Well, certainly, you know, testimony about infidelity never puts a person in a positive light, but it's going to be interesting to see what weight the jury gives to this testimony and this evidence, as well as the medical testimony, which is yet to be seen.
If you were the jury right now, 9 days into the trial, what would you make of all of this?
You know, I would have to say that certainly there's been testimony about Dr. MacNeill's odd, possibly even, you know, bizarre behavior, but does that overcome reasonable doubt? Does that overcome the presumption of innocence? And has the prosecution proved their claim beyond a reasonable doubt?
So do you feel like there's been reasonable doubt so far?
Well, you know, we're not at the close of the evidence yet, but these are just the questions that I have in my mind.
And then as far as Dr. MacNeill, we've heard testimony from so many people. Why do you think the defense has not put him on the stand to testify?
Well, we're still in the prosecution's case. We haven't yet moved to the defense witnesses, and in fact, we don't know yet whether or not Dr. MacNeill will take the stand in his own defense. That's one of the most closely guarded
Would you put him up there if you were his defense attorney?
You know, there's so much information that's in the public domain, things that we know about and things that we don't know about that, you know, we are not privy to. Certainly it would be nice to hear some of the things that he might say in his own defense, but he has the right not to testify against himself, as you know.
Well, would you put him up there, though?
You know, I'd have to say that at this point, I probably would not have him take the stand.
Not you. And as far as the prosecution's case, you were saying we're still in the process of hearing the prosecution's case before we get to the defense. What do you think of their case so far? Do you think there are holes there, or do they have a strong case?
I think the biggest thing that the prosecution has to worry about is the lack of a finding of homicide in any of the medical examiner's reports. You've had 3 or 4 different medical examiners who've taken a look at this case, and none of them can even rule conclusively that the death was a homicide.
So that's the biggest hole right now. That's the dilemma, is proving that Michelle MacNeill was even murdered.
Exactly. And even if you were to find that she overdosed on drugs, does that mean that Dr. MacNeill gave her those drugs with the intent to kill her?
And that would give jurors a reason to have reasonable doubt.
Exactly.
All right, Tanya Peters, thank you so much for joining us this
Thank
afternoon.
you.
Appreciate it. And of course,